third training session, virtual session on environmental jurisdictions, which is supported by Environmental Law Institute, the General Prosecutor's Office, and the Institute of Studies of the Public Ministry. As you already know, before we start, I'd like to recap on a previous session and some ground rules that we should bear in mind for these sessions. Once again, we will have simultaneous translation. However, the speakers will be speaking Spanish this time. Anyhow, we ask you to please go to the Spanish channel in case there's any question from English to Spanish. You won't have to be changing in the last minute. So, interpretation Spanish. The sessions are being recorded and they'll be shared afterwards. Be reminded to send your questions or concerns only through the chat windows, and we collect them and pass them on to the speakers. And also, as you know, with the support of the Institute of Studies of the Public Ministry will grant a certificate of attendance only to those attendees who have actually attended and registered for the whole time of sessions in the forms that we'll be sharing. They'll be going around in the chat in the second hour of the session. Today's agenda is as follows. We'll have a very short recap, and then we'll hear the three cases from today's session, the Brazilian case, Chilean, and Guatemalan cases, so that then we continue with a QA session. Today's speakers, we have Judge Antonio Hermano Benjamin from Brazil. He was appointed in 2006 as a judge in higher justice in Brazil. He was a general deputy attorney of Sao Paulo State in Brazil. He was responsible for litigation and environmental issues. He was a member of the group of experts of the UN for crimes against the environment, and he was appointed for another commission in Brazil. Second, we have ex-minister Michael Hantel. He's from Chile. He specializes in environmental law and national resources, especially water. Also economic regulation and free competition. He's also an international consultant, and he used to work as a head minister of the Third Environmental Tribunal in Valdivia, Chile, since it was created in 2013 and up to September 2019. At the end of his appointment, during this time, he was the first chairperson of the tribunal and led this facility. And third, we'll hear Guatemala from Carla Hernandez, first prime instance from in this court of the PT department that sees crimes against the environment. She's seen cases in different jurisdictions throughout the country. In 2015, the Supreme Court decided to create the first specialized court and chose or appointed the Judge Hernandez, given her experience in environmental law. We thank all of them and welcome to the seminar. Well, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. I'm going to use my slides. Let me see how I can share them with you.
¿Qué norma tiene que ella tiene que firmar? Aunque bueno, el concepto, pero el concepto.
I hope you can see my slides now. Yes, we can see them. Okay, good morning to everyone again. Thank you for this invite. I want to thank the Prosecutor's Office of Colombia and Environmental Law Institute and our colleagues from the academia, the judges, especially Professor Angela Maria, who is admired in many other places, not only Colombia, because of her scientific work that have been so important. I've been given 20 minutes and I'd like to make some previous observations. I'll be speaking Spanish, but my native language is Portuguese. So if I lack a word, I'm gonna ask for the help from my colleagues. Sometimes I just don't have the words, especially the technical words. First of all, I'm going to talk about the legislative conditions for environmental jurisdictions. And here, I'd like to spend a little bit more time because I believe it is important to make a comparison between the Colombian conditions and situations and maybe our countries, the other Latin American countries, and probably not places in the world. And second, I'm going to talk about the institutional conditions because they're also important. The environmental jurisdiction does not just come out of the blue, it doesn't come out from nothing. It is therefore necessary to know the conditions of several origins. And here I'd like to try to deal with some of them, not all of them though. The third group of conditions are the administrative conditions. And finally, the models that I guess all of us, those of us who will be speaking today, will be looking into that. Okay, let's look at the legislative conditions. First of all, before even thinking of an environmental jurisdiction, a specialized one, or any environmental jurisdiction in general terms, we have to ask ourselves the question, is there a legal and constitutional framework that be suitable to constitute that jurisdiction? I think the question here in the Colombian case is affirmative. I mean, the answer is meant. It's very clearly an affirmative response to this question. Colombia not only does it have a legal system, uh, standards, norms to protect the environment, and I'm gonna talk about that a little bit in a few minutes. But Colombia also has a constitutional framework that is very innovative. And it's that constitutional framework is part of what we could call the post Rio conference stage. So after the influence of the Rio conference has helped, for example, in Article 80 of the Constitution that talks about expressly the, I'm sorry, I don't understand some of his words. Speaking of sustainable development, it also talks about the health, the environment Article 79, but then it refers to other constitutions of previous stages, prior to the constitution. I'm sorry, prior to this, the Conference of Rio. I think that's what he's talking about. I also want to touch on something that might take a whole course by itself about the way Colombia manages or deals with private property and the relation to environmental protection. This is actually in Article 58 of the Constitution, where we see this. I'm going to read it because it's a very important article. I think it is more important than Article 79 because all the issues that we face, either environmental pollution, either destruction of biodiversity, they have an origin in the formulation, the legal constitutional of the right of property. Article 58 of Colombian Constitution, and this is very innovative. Very few countries have this, only Colombia and Brazil, and more recently with a different way of wording. the Ecuadorian Constitution, the Bolivian Constitution, but Article 58 reads that we guarantee private property. That's in every constitution in the world. But the second paragraph is what is innovative and it's important. It's key to us, for us judges, but also to the enforcing bodies to regulate the use, the possible use of natural resources. The Constitution says property is a social function which implies obligations. This is not new. The social function of property had already been recognized in other constitutions at the beginning of the 20th century and also in the Roman Constitution of the first half of the 20th century. All the constitutions in America have this social function of property. The extraordinary innovating part is the phrase, the next sentence. As such, it is inherent to play an ecological task. Thus, Colombian Constitution and the whole system, constitutional system of Colombia, has this as a starting point. It's a perspective of an ecological function of property. I mean, real estate, I think it means. It's more than this. Another institute we have in Sweden, for example, the Allemansraten, I think you said, it's a much wider sense. It's not just the right to walk into someone's private property with a few more restrictions. So it's a key concept, it's a foundation of Colombian constitution. Of course, this is in other countries such as the US would be considered revolution, something revolutionary idea. It would be believed to be something compatible with the traditional formulation of a system. Colombia also has a legal framework and wonderful constitutional framework. I just wanted to touch on that. I don't have much time. I want to mention two or three more points. This comes from a law from 99, another one from 93, which is the law on environmental policy in Colombia. Amongst the general principles, see how interesting this is and with direct consequences to this topic that we're dealing with right now. Already in Article 1, it says that the economic development and social development process of the country will be led according to universal principles and sustainable development. According to those principles, there's nothing new there either in comparison to other legal systems of other countries. But it goes on. Sustainable development contained in the Rio de Janeiro Declaration of 1992, the Rio Declaration. This is the only general law of the environment in the world that incorporates and as a result turns into a direct standard norm. It includes the Rio Declaration because in all other countries, even Brazil, Chile, Guatemala, those that are present here today, the Rio Declaration is quoted by judges during their sentences, but how a document of inspiration to complement national law. But here in Colombia, judges, when they quote the Rio Declaration, they're actually quoting direct or standards or regulation that has direct relation. It's presently Law 99 from 1993. There are other interesting points, but I don't have enough time to deep or dwell on those topics. But I think it's interesting to say a couple words about this inclusion of the Rio Declaration directly in the regulatory text. It's wonderful because the Rio Declaration does not have a binding effect in international law. However, here, the Rio Declaration is incorporated here, it's embedded here. And directly, I mean, and there are some questions we won't be able to discuss now. For example, if the Rio Declaration is incorporated directly, do they also incorporate the Stockholm Declaration? Because the Rio Declaration reaffirms and restates the principle of the Stockholm Declaration. That's going to turn 50 years, and there's a very important tribute to the name that's been responsible for all of this, and the man who is the first prime minister. I don't understand his name, but we never forget his work to achieve this event in the Stockholm Conference of 1972. Okay, I also wanted to just remind ourselves that when we talk about legislative conditions for environmental jurisdictions, we are also talking about the principles of environmental law. And of course, those principles are present in Colombian situation now, as it's been shown through a different of sentences and rulings that have been there for some time now. Colombian environmental law, and here there's another, let's say, tribute to another big one of environmental law in Latin America. My friend that left very young, Germán Sarmiento Palacio, the founder of the Public Fund. He had a wider view then. It was not just environmental law, but it was collective interest to implement the collective rights through the judicial path. To talk about environmental jurisdictions, then we need to ask ourselves this question. What about the institutional conditions of the country? First, the organization of the judicial power, and this would vary much from country to country. Brazil, for example, we don't have a state council. We don't have a state. Colombia does have a state council, which means that Colombia has three paths, three avenues, parallel avenues, but still different to access justice. And access justice for environmental proceedings. First, the Supreme Court, that highway and judges. The second, the highway of the Constitutional Court, and then the highway of the State Council. Like three roads, kind of the French model, probably based on the French model. And of course, there are difficulties because these are different jurisdictions. And second, we also need to ask ourselves, what is the model to access justice? And the model to access justice in Colombia is probably the most democratic model in the world. And this comes from before the new constitution and Germán Sarmiento's work. It's also important to ask, what about the resource system? Because several countries, well, they have a big number of resources. They have a lot of resources. This means that when the decision, an environmental decision, is going to be made, it's a judged matter in environmental law. Well, it's been 20 years. And this is important to ask, what about the system, the resource system? And finally, this subtitle, the budget, because there are legal powers that are present in several parts in the world, and they don't have the budget they need. It doesn't come from the Ministry of Justice or the ruling of the executive power, actually. So it's key here to look at the institutional conditions and ask what are the warranties for judges and, of course, prosecuting attorneys. Because if there are independent judges, there are independent attorneys, then the system will not work. We can specialize the jurisdictions to the highest level, but if they don't have independence and integrity, then it will not work. And of course, here we have to think about the public ministry, the office of the attorney general, the attorneys, because they to be very independent. And here in Colombia, I think these conditions are present for attorneys as well, prosecuting attorneys. And finally, what we're doing here, the education, legal, judicial training, how it will be conducted, because judges are not, or attorneys are not just experts. Just as a matter of fact, they are a judge, okay, they are a king, they are the owner of all truth, they know everything, but that's not the case, that's not it. And sometimes we don't know what environmental law is and the specificities of environmental law. So we need to find ways to train judges. The administrative conditions, I have very little time left. Just a few comments. First, the judicial power is not the model institution of the solution to environmental conflicts. The judge is the ultima ratio. Otherwise, if the law is not followed, is not enforced, or it's not respected by everyone, then the problem is not just justice, it's a cultural issue then as well. Hence the need to have also environmental administration that is transparent, that works on the foundation of good faith, and that is integral, that behaves with integrity, that is not contaminated by corruption. And finally, the environmental jurisdiction models. Because we talk about environmental jurisdiction as if necessarily we were talking about a specialized environmental jurisdiction with specialized judges. That's not the case. That's not the case in most places in the world. So most countries in the world don't have environmental specialization, but the reality is that it's very few countries that actually have a specialized environmental system. When they have it, it's not really horizontal, and today it's not complete, it's not comprehensive. So the first prevalent model of the world is total fragmentation. Fragmentation at first instance, first degree, fragmentation in the appeal tribunals or the appeal courts, and fragmentation at the national court level or Supreme Court. So there's another group, the small topics of countries that have partial specialization. And I think it's the case of Brazil, it's the case of Chile, Australia, Kenya, Switzerland, and other countries. But there are different degrees of specialization, different forms of specialization. And finally, total specialization. Of course, this classification here is just for teaching purposes, pedagogical purposes, to facilitate understanding of different models. There are, but they are not closed categories. There are many variations between the different countries. The total specialization, I believe, we can see as an example the I don't know if she said China or Chile. It's a first degree specialization. There's a specialization in the province tribunals, the state supreme courts of the US, and there is a specialization in the Chinese Supreme Court with a division chamber with more than 30 judges of the Supreme Court devoted to environmental concerns. Finally, and a little bit of a new perspective, is that there is administrative specialization. In other words, there is environmental specialized administrative jurisdiction, and there are others. For example, in the case of Brazil, there are judges that integrate this. It's not a separate career, and there are judicial systems that have their own features, and for the administrative specialization as well as the judicial, they have independence issues. Many times, Michael Hutton, my friend and dear colleague, might be addressing this point. Many times these specializations are almost judicial. They come with some serious issues. I'm sorry that word that I understand. That reduce the independence, the permanence of the good judges in these courts. Because the more independent the judge is, the stronger the certainty he will not be misled after a 4-year mandate or 5-year mandate. And these judges have a very serious issue, the perspective of independence of a true environmental jurisdiction. So in conclusion, first conclusion at regional level, but also based in my 24-year experience as an attorney, almost 14 years as a judge of the Supreme Court of Justice in Brazil, that is a national court. I forgot to mention that with 33 ministers, I think means judges, it would be a function of the Supreme Court or the State Council there. That's how we would identify it. In addition to the cassation court. So the first conclusion is pretty obvious, and it applies not only to environmental law, but to all the points of law. And it's that there isn't a magic solution. In other words, we have to do housework, internal work, and research to see what is available in the world. I've seen colleagues who have worked a lot on comparative law. For example, Professor Angel Maria, Carl Group. For example, the constitutional protection of the environment. I recommend an article, and wonderful article from Carl Borg, sometime now, but it's still up to date, which analyzes this growth of constitutional protection in several countries. Second conclusion, the elements. It's to work with the elements that we have, because the institutions don't come out of the blue. I mean, the environmental jurisdiction of the Scandinavian countries, those countries that have a specialized jurisdiction, they started with other courts that they had before. For example, the water courts. And there was an evolution. There's a history. And this sometimes the history is wrong, and we need to walk away from that history. We need to change it, and that's valid too. And it's absolutely necessary. But we have to do this in a conscientious manner, and not just with the little transplant, or worse, with the institutional transplant. My final remark is about the focus. There's a trend, especially in international events, to focus. I understand the word. For example, the landscape, climate change, water crisis, the pesticide crisis, pollution, all at the same time. But what is, as a matter of fact, for countries such as Chile, Brazil, Colombia, Guatemala, what's the main focus? I am convinced, I might be wrong, that the main focus has to be the protection of natural habitats, because protection of habitats is the is macro protection of all the environment. And of course, we have the wonderful habitat of tropical forest that we enjoy in our countries. In the case of Chile, it's a tropical forest, and other regions, as will be addressed by Michael. So from my viewpoint, the focus, and it's got to be a very clear focus, but of course, it's to include the other possibilities in the protection of tropical forest and subtropical forests in our countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister Antonio, for your words and for the presentation you have given us today. We pass on the floor to Michael from Chile. Good morning, everybody. The truth is that to me, it is an honor to be here sharing with all of you. I would like to thank particularly Carl Burke because of his invitation, Environmental Institute, the General Attorney's Office, the Institute of Studies of Public Ministry, and Angela Maya, a great teacher, distinguished teacher from Colombia, so that we can share with you today. I am going to share my screen with you. I hope you can see it. Can you see my screen? Yes, we can see it. Great. Well, truth be said, besides sharing with you today, it is an honor for me to take the floor after one of the professors in environmental issues in Latin America, Magister, Judicature Antonio. So what he has done is to generate a scenario. He clarified what I would like to talk to you about. I am thinking about colleagues, lawyers, who are normally in courts, in environmental courts, actually. So there is a frustration, generally speaking, to what happens in environmental issues. I constantly travel to Colombia. I know Colombian reality, and this is a constant concern in relation to the protection of the environment. All conflicts a country like Colombia lives in relation to natural wealth, magistrate referred to. Not only that, but many natural resources that land is blessed and it has a lot of concerns in extra legal and legal communities. So I'm going to focus on this topic particularly. Based on this concern, I would like to tell you about Chile's experience. I would like to start out by telling you that these are some of the teachings by Minister Benjamin. This is not silver bullet that is gonna solve the problem in Colombia. I'm gonna tell you what problems we have faced. Minister Benjamin has already mentioned them, dependent, and today I am going to focus on practical issues. I know those are concerns Colombia constantly has. I'm going to talk to you environmental courts in Chile, what good things they have, what bad things they have. I'd also like to focus on judicial processes so that you have an idea how they work every day and what the achievements and perspectives for these courts are. Different from the discussion that we have nowadays with the general attorneys to create environmental courts. Not only that, last week I was sharing with Minister Marco Antonio Velilla and Oscar Abraya from a State Council about creating environmental courts in Colombia. There is this concern at State Council. Different from Colombia, in Chile, environmental courts did not just come up because there was interest in protecting the environment or natural resources. No. The decision to create them in Chile was because of an evaluation that OECD did so that Chile could be could become member of the OECD. That evaluation, ECLAC conducted it along with that organization, and they asked Chile to comply with compliance and fiscalization in environmental matters. So there were 3 new institutions created: Ministry of Environment, the Environmental Service, ANLA in Colombia, Superintendents of Environment. They supervise. So licenses are separate from supervision. And public policy is up there in the model, in the ministry. We have followed this model. After creating this system, these 3 institutions, the different corporations were concerned about all those faculties the state was being given, and the state was gonna be stronger than users, let's say. So that's why private sector requested the creation of special tribunals, protecting guarantees to application of law by these fiscalization institutions. So there is this law that created environmental tribunals or courts. Okay, something interesting that is so important for Colombia. Before creating environmental courts, just like Colombia, we used to have this resource that is a protection of constitutional guarantees. This is something that also exists in Colombia that can be submitted to any judge in Colombia. And we did have it as well. And anyways, environmental courts were created because the jurisdiction to protect constitutional guarantees, because we in Colombia, we have the environment free of pollution to be protected by this protection resource. So even though we had that, those courts were created because we believed that if they knew, if there was more knowledge, they could have these different decisions right? If it was not centralized, they could have different decisions from one court to another. So that's why we decided to have that centralized system. Then environmental courts were created. Let me tell you that we still have the protection resource, and it has had this new birth, let's say. Environmental courts are special jurisdictional bodies. They are special jurisdictional bodies, like I said. They are almost legal judicial, like Minister Benjamin said. They are subject to directive superintendents. I am to the Supreme Court, right? There's a hierarchy. So Supreme Court is up there, and they need to solve environmental controversies. There were three courts. We have more than 5,000 kilometers, right? Our country is really long, 5,000 kilometers. And distances are so long. That's why in the beginning, we even thought of creating courts in each one of the regions. But we needed to have some analysis, right? And there were not so many cases. So only one was created in Santiago, the central area in Chile, and then there was a decision to create these three courts. So that you can have an idea, workload in a country as Chile, we have 18 million inhabitants, means about 70 to 100 causes per year, or even less in some courts. So in spite of the fact that it sounds like very few cases, the amount of money involved is really big. For example, per year, the first court in the north area, basically mining issues are covered there. They have this amount, this project for more than $5,000 million. So those cases are extremely relevant in terms of economic impact and environmental impact. This is something that was mentioned by Minister Benjamin, and because these courts, just like in Colombia with the Supreme Court and State Council and Constitutional Court, and they have these periods for designation, we also have that problem. See what the independence is, right? Because judges can be subject to certain types of pressure because of what happens. So there is something that is absolutely relevant because of the commitment of investments and the protection of environment. Let's look at the design. How did we decide that? Creating a court, one of the magistrates is not a lawyer. There were different solutions, like Minister Benjamin mentioned, but basically we created a court that is comprised by 3 ministers, 2 are lawyers, and one of them is licensed in science, like bachelor in science. That sounded weird in our country because traditionally judges are lawyers, right? They saw minor issues, but in this case, this is the minister, someone licensed in science. They are designated for periods by 6 years, and they can be re-elected, and they can be re-elected for another 6 years. The president is involved there, the Supreme Court, and Senate. They're all involved there. It's long, slow steps. For example, appointing designations can actually take many years, and they could even have some time without a minister. The appointing system is actually bad in that sense. What is the advantage, though, to have a magistrate who is licensed licensed in science, their contribution in decision making. I believe, I mean, I don't know if this is the best solution, but what I do think is that including science when making decisions is key in this process. Taking the Chilean model or the Australian model, there is one judge that is assisted by different commissioners that help them, not lawyers, but they are professional in sciences. That's another possibility. Or there is a chamber in a court where they can have this type of commissioners. What I do believe, I firmly believe, and I'm convinced that audio is not good. I believe that we can have an obstacle in the protection of environment. There's an approximation. So I understand, Minister of Benjamin, the protection of habitats, or translating this in science and ecosystems, protecting ecosystems and how ecosystems work. It's impossible to be able to protect those types of units. It is not well understood how these ecosystems work. And what I would like to say is that lawyers, it's not that we need to turn into scientists. What I would like to say is that we need to come out our comfort zone and we need to understand what others are saying. And this comes not only because of experience, years of experience, but also because this experience being able to dedicate to environmental issues. So knowledge curve changes as one is embedded in these topics every day. It's not something accidental to the usual cases that you have, I mean, civil, commercial, so on. And when you have something like this, it is very weird when we have these environmental cases. Okay, environmental courts were created with two competences. Administrative contentious, environmental administrative contentious matters, control on environmental administration actions when they set regulations, and sanction processes that environmental superintendents covers. 75% of court is based on this, particularly on revision of decisions made by superintendents, but also revising licenses, environmental licenses. A lot of cases in relation to this, particularly licensing, citizen participation, indigenous communities participation, discretional acts, so on. And the second area is related to ecological or environmental damage. I would like to tell you that because of political decision within the competences, we didn't include forest laws, water law, hunting, fishing, mineral code, mining code. They are not part of that. Environmental courts are not competent in the following matters. So, in practical terms, it meant modifying the system, and that's how these systems were separated without knowing about these matters. So they should know about these matters because environmental issues cannot be seen in a sectoral manner. So for example, water law in Chile are oriented to protection of production and not environmental. So when that is separated, many problems come up. Environmental damage. I would like to tell you about those courts that need to research environmental damage. So we have this subjective responsibility matter, and we need to look at extra-contractual responsibility in relation to damage to the environment. The court sees this, and if they declare that there was damage, the sentence is um, to be able to have remediation, right? I have little time, so I'm just going to have general comments about procedures. I like to tell you that they are so fast in general terms, right, for Chile. So we have one instance procedures in environmental. They have a one, and the decision or sentence, it cannot go appeals. You cannot have appeals. You can only check law in the Supreme Court, and procedures goes by the court. So it means the court is the one that calls parties, so that it goes from stage to stage, and they are very concise. So there is a claim in case of administrative contentious decisions, and then they ask for a report to authorities, and once they have that, then they call a hearing. They have a hearing to hear parties, and then there is a sentence. It's super fast. It could take 6 months or even less in many cases. It can also take more than 6 months, depending on the matter. And in case of environmental damage, there is also a claim. Then the party is notified, so there is replication. Then the court has this evidence, and then there's this hearing, conciliation, evidence, and then sentence is in 30 days given. So this is super fast. This goes a little bit slower because there has to be notifications, and sometimes processes can take long. Sometimes, I don't know, 2, 3 years. But even so, it's a lot faster than in civil cases. Achievements. Well, the creation of these environmental tribunals has broadened access to justice and the right to have appeal for the decisions. That's in general terms. With the creation of this specialized jurisdiction, there is a decrease in technical deference that justice tribunals have for administration. That's why it is compelled, administration is compelled to be more specific, to be more rigorous when exercising attributions, especially in those areas that are related to these discretionable powers administrations have. Okay, so they have increased rigorosity and standards have increased. I'm talking about public administration and also private parties that need to increase compliance when environmental courts are a part of decisions. There is also environmental jurisprudence generation. It is more consistent, it is deeper in different environmental institutions. Environmental trials are faster, and something that is relevant is adopting decisions that are tailored to territorial reality. Colombia has the same circumstances, different areas. Hot weather, cold weather, forest. We also have jungle, coast. So you cannot have just single decisions. They need to be tailored according to the reality, right? And to end, something I would like to say that is absolutely relevant and something that environmental courts are missing, I would say that compliance of environmental sentences. Environmental decisions that restoration cannot be done immediately, but it needs to be adopted sometimes looking at the long term. So how these sentences are executed, this is a relevant question. And then who's in charge of verifying that the environment has been restored in case of environmental damage? That's absolutely relevant. And then a question about sentence compliance, that is very important. I took 2 minutes more over my presentation, so I'm gonna stop here and I'm open to any question that you may have. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Hankel, for your intervention, for your words. Now we're gonna have Carla from Guatemala, and later we're gonna have the question sessions. Just to tell you that we have 200 people in YouTube. Please remember to ask questions in chat so that we can pass them on to the speakers.
Good morning. It's a great pleasure to be with you this morning to be able to share part of the experiences we've had in Guatemala regarding environmental jurisdiction. Here in Guatemala, this is a more recent thing. It hasn't been for many years. It hasn't been there. Speaking of justice administration and environmental realm, but we also have some institutions that have indeed been present for several decades. For example, we have the public ministry. It was created as such, and it started to specialize into different offices. We call them attorney offices. We had an environmental attorney's office. This office was present in Petén, Izabal, Taberama, Guatemala, different departments, and it could hear other cases from other departments in Guatemala, for example, Reta León, other names of provinces in Guatemala. In addition to that, to the attorney's office, there were other environmental offices. It was called cultural heritage. It was regional. In addition to hearing cases of crimes against the cultural heritage, also cases from La Paz, Izabal, Chiquibula, and Zacapa. These are regions in Guatemala. Since this is a country with the greatest identity with Mayan culture, especially in Petén department, there's where we see the greatest number of these representations of the Mayan culture. When we talk about natural heritage, we also talk about cultural heritage. They go hand in hand, they are embedded. So if there is an impact on natural heritage, you also impact cultural heritage, and the other way around. If you impact one, you'll obviously impact the other. At the same time, unfortunately, the Attorney's Office of the Environment disappeared in Petén, this region, maybe because it was not important, it was not relevant as what the central government thought at the time. And later, it was reactivated. This Attorney's Office of the Environment was restarted. It was in 2015 in September, actually. And it was formally instituted. This Petén Attorney's Office was instituted again. Regarding the judicial power in Guatemala, which is the legal body or the judicial body through Decree 5192, that creates our new criminal law. We changed a different system from inquisitive to accusatory, but it took some time to train the judges back then to move from one system to the other, to the accusatory one, because it's a 360-degree angle in justice administration. The judge, in addition to being a judge, he was a judge on part because they investigated, and then in addition to that, they passed sentences, rulings. When the new code was created, we noticed that we had to have specialized judges, especially in the context of the environment. We had to see specialized judges, first instance judges, and criminal judges that would hear common crimes. For example, extortion, blackmailing, kidnapping, theft, and so on. When the sentence tribunals, though, it was established the narco activity judges and crimes against the environment. This was a new division, a new specialization, but they did not refer to any specialization in particular. This specialization, the process code talks about, did not take place because of lack of economic resources. That was one of the reasons or reasons or excuses why we didn't see any specialized judges. So we see new judges to hear from the three branches, and we call them the judges. First is criminal, first instance court, narco activity, and crimes against the environment. So only one judge had to hear all cases. Later, Guatemala, after the different declarations and conventions that Guatemala has become a member to, as well as the other conventions, we started to talk about specialized courts. For example, for violence against women, there are specialized judges that hear this type of violence and conflict. So here in Guatemala, there's been more specialty, more and more within the criminal branch. Regarding crimes against the environment, it was in 2015, in July 2015, when it all started. And then they took more seriously the issue of environmental concerns, so that a specialized judge would hear specifically about environmental cases in the criminal branch. So this type of court was created to see these cases as in the case of Petén. The Petén Department, the Supreme Justice Court, passed a lot or passed a decree to create this. Then in 2016, there was a greater, the competence was expanded for the judge or for the court, for those judges who hear environmental crimes, also will hear cases against, cases of crime against the cultural heritage. It was in 2017 when they created a specialized judge of crimes against the environment and cultural heritage, specifically in Petén. Again, this is a department, and I was appointed there as a judge of that body. It's important to highlight here that this court became official on August 30th, 2018. So it was over a year in the moment the court was created for this court to start operating. As it was explained by my colleague, Antonio, here, unfortunately, it's not a specialized justice at 100%, since we have courts also that are very personal in other departments, for example, Zacapa, Coan, that they also hear there's a special judge that hears environmental cases. Another one of narco activity and criminal cases. So we are sure there because we are only specializing judges of first instance to hear environmental crimes. Now, along the criminal process in Guatemala, we also hear what is called the reparation of environmental and social damage. It's something that has been regulated by Article 124 of that regulation. But this reparation of social environmental damage will be exercised for as long as the sentence court that knows that hears the proceedings and has seen the different stages of the criminal proceedings passes a sentence condemning. Once a sentence or there's a ruling, there's a 5-day term for the tribunal, assigns a later hearing and will hear about the reparation of social environmental damage. And we see there is a condition for the social environmental damage to be paid. He has to agree to the economic possibilities of the defendant. Whoever was accused or he was sentenced after the trial. So they are responsible for paying for the social environmental damage. But if their economic conditions are not the best, even then, the damage caused to the environment, if it's a sum, for example, let's say 200, 500 quetzales, the local currency, if this person does not have the means or cannot afford to pay this, the judge must set an amount that corresponds to the economic conditions of this defendant. So we are sure there, speaking of the reparation of social environmental damage, that will never repaired at 100%. We have a principle that is called he who pollutes pays and repairs. But many times repairing damage to the environment cannot really be repaired at 100% because it was discussed before, the habitats of ecosystems. I mean, if you harm a habitat, how can humans repair this at 100%? We have in our attending department with an area that's called the Maya Biosphere Reservation. This Mayan Biosphere Reservation has about 21,602 square kilometers. It's the biggest area in Guatemala, speaking of protected areas. If there's a fire, there's logging, where there is an authorization from the National Council of Protected Areas, which is the ruling body of protected areas, then human beings will never be capable to rehabilitate this area before the crime was committed. Unfortunately, when there are crimes against the environment, the judge is not always able to hear these cases. Speaking of environmental concerns, prior to hearing the case and in the criminal side, the prevention is always better. Unfortunately, the environmental and administrative authorities that are not capable, are not, let's say, enough to plan the resources to protect these areas, they'll be vulnerable. And this vulnerability, that's what the criminals take advantage of. And in the long run, they will harm our natural resources. So we still, the Maya Biosphere Reserve in the Petén Department has this capability of resilience. I mean, it can recover itself. Of course, it's not overnight. It might take time between 10, 15, up to 20 years for the area to recover fully, or not even, only at a 60%. But what if we harm the forest? We are also damaging the wildlife. And if we harm the wildlife, we're also impacting the forest. I mean, everything is related. About this, we also have a specialized police force that we call the PRONA. It was called SEPRONA before. Is the arm that protects nature from the National Civil Police, and their main goal is to protect natural resources as a whole. Unfortunately, the number of troops the police have for this is not relevant to protect natural resources. At least in the Petén area, there are about 75 police officers to protect the 21,600 square kilometers. So if you distribute these members among the 21,000 square, so how many square kilometers does one officer have to cover? At least the Division of Natural Protection. Later, the National Prosecutor's Office also, they have an Environmental Advocacy Office or Environmental Bureau. This PGN, the National Prosecutor's Office, represents the Guatemalan state in the proceedings through which the state is the committing party. It's not the state itself the one that is accused, but it's the population as a whole. And in some cases, the negative effects later we can see impacting other countries, the neighboring countries. with which we have borders. Guatemala also has now a Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, but the function of this ministry is just administrative. Next slide. About our biodiversity, well, as we can see here, this biosphere called Maya Reservation, but it tries to preserve a whole system and expand research in environmental concerns. This slide, I can show a jaguar, an iguana, and an orchid that are something that we could call the, it represents the weaknesses that we see regarding the protection of the uh, of wildlife in general. This is the jaguar, because of their skin, they're always hunted. The flesh is not eaten, whereas the iguana, the meat, is very desired. And speaking of the flowers, there's predation because it's sold both internally as well as internationally. The patent department is really relevant because it's the area of the department that has the greatest number of wildlife species within the all the ecosystems it has. Also in P10, in this Maya Biosphere Reservation, we have two very important parks. And we see in national, the Tiger Lagoon Park, National Park, and another national park, Sierra, because of the geoposition. Unfortunately, they're very vulnerable, especially for drugs activities, because they have a borderline with Mexico. Here, for example, we see a jaguar that is drinking water. This is a picture after the quarantine of the COVID-19, and because of the yes, the quarantine, the isolation, we can see how animals in different parks, they feel more relaxed. So they are trap cameras, and we've been able to take pictures. Different species of animals, and we see how they are a more relaxed situation than even in these states that there are parks and there are people who options for people to come and visit these parks. We think that animals become stressed because of the presence of human beings, even when there are studies that prove that there is a limited number of people who can visit parks. It's not the same thing for animals to be in their habitat, that they're completely relaxed, and if they see humans, well, animals will not appear, as we was observed in this picture. We saw a jaguar drinking water, enjoying peacefully. Another weakness or threats that we see in our forests, in our tropical forests, is unfortunately the forest fires. About a month ago, we were still discussing and struggling against forest fires. Unfortunately, the fact that there's livestock, illegal livestock in protected areas, inside protected areas, is one of the reasons only why these forest fires are caused, because later what they try to do is to open and more a wider terrain for illegal livestock within protected areas. As we can see, this also harms ecosystems that are protected through the Guatemala system of protected areas that we call SIGAP. NACOLRED is the one that provides services about fires. This picture, we can see a calf that was dying. That calf, that was because in 2017, it was in April, within the national park, the Tiger Lagoon, that's the name of the park, is the core of this Maya Biosphere Reservation. And as the core area is not allowed to practice any kind of cattling activity. and they stepped into an area to recognize the area had been impacted when the National Police Force, civil National Police Force, in the area of the Bureau to protect the natural resources, they realized that they saw livestock and heads of cattle being transported, and they, of course, they were seized. And then they started to see more and more news, such as this one. This was taken from a comment in Facebook where they show that the judicial power they only don't care that these animals die, but actually the cattle was in very bad condition. All these cows and the calves. This was a very hard strike to narco traffic and livestock because unfortunately within this park, it's just one of the activities that take place there inside the park. Also, this park has more than 2,000 square kilometers. Well, inside and around 50 to 7 uh, rangers are supposed to protect the park. The force cannot force rangers cannot work more than or cover 20, 30 kilometers, and if we divide the 2,000 kilometers of this park among the 70 officers, then how many hundreds of kilometers will each one have to protect or cover? So here in our news, this is how reported in a newsletter. About 50 heads of cattle were seized when they were moving from a protected area, and some of them were dying of hunger, were starving. They had been there for a month, and MALA is the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock. This is in Santa Elena de la Cruz region, but the state did not take care or did not protect the number of cows that were seized. The justice idea that the cattle would be seized and would be left for the authorities to be donated to some charity organization. They showed in the news that they don't believe this. The thing is that the cattle is just starving without food in front of the carelessness of the employees and the officers. This file that started with a C because it was not only 54 heads, that was the first day when they were just going to recognize an area. They were distributing four trucks. They were loading to four trucks. The next day, when we were conducting the proceedings, we came to the surprise that we found another three trucks that were also transporting legal heads of cattle. It was like 130 uh, cows and oxen. It was the first time since the creation of the reservation that cattle was seized. The people who do this kind of illegal activity inside the protected area, they were really impacted. Let's say seriously, let's say their pockets were touched. Later, we can see in this other picture that after the seize of this cattle, then we conducted the process and this the sentence, they were condemned or let's say charged with the crime of violation of protected areas. So people who do this and whose aim is to get money, to get profit from the protected areas without permission, they let's say grab this charge after having the file and have closed the process in January last year, January 9th last year, 2019. We had to go there again, the same area, to carry out a legal proceeding. Later, when we were coming out on January 9th, 2019, we were stopped for 3 days there. That's what the other colleagues were talking about. So where's the safety of the officers, those who we, those of us who hear and see normal crimes? Well, unfortunately, we're released until January 11th. So we're saying that we were stopped there, we were held for 3 days. So the police could not do anything, but because they were civil population, most of them, they are robbers, if you wish. They would not let us through. The issue is that to come out of this area is that you have to go over the San Pedro River, St. Peter's River, to get to the other part of the town, and the ferry was not working. If the ferry does not work, there was no way to cross. Unfortunately, also, the St. Peter was high. There was 3 or 4 boats, engines with powerful boats, but they were not present there so that we couldn't leave, not even to take a boat. We couldn't do that so that we crossed to their side of the river. Well, unfortunately, these people were threatened because we came here to conduct our proceeding, but they reacted. Wherever they come, the legal body, the National Prosecutor's Office, the uh, National Council Protected Areas, because somehow they were impacted by these illegal activities carried out in the protected areas. Later, we'll see a picture, 2 more pictures that show, for example, this is an area where they do illegal cuddling or livestock. So you see the conditions of deforestation, and they also carry out activities. We see the mud water. It's like a pond. This is an artificial one. So they collect water for cows. This park has a feature that's also a mangrove. As a mangrove or as a wetland, has a lot of sources of drinkable water. Another reason for illegal livestock activities, they start working and doing these works, some sort of path or tunnel, so that the water from the wetland would also come here and be available to the cattle. Unfortunately, they first burn the areas, then they clean them, and then that's when they start to sow grass, to plant grass so that the cattle can eat that grass. But that's illegal, an illegal activity from any point of view. It's not even 60 square blocks, people who do this activity. Here we call it something like a ranch. It's about 64 blocks. We're saying that unfortunately every year the areas are impacted more and more by the fires, logging, and then illegal livestock. We can see an illegal action or something. Unfortunately, when the authorities come in, they just see some tracks or traces when they have also exported or picked up drugs from here, or sometimes the jets are burned when the police are coming. Oh, that's the legal landing track. We can see the previous slide. We see another legal landing track. That's where the aircrafts land. They sometimes come from Colombia to pick up drugs, and then it's moved to Mexico. At the end of that landing track, you see the water reservation, the wetlands of this protected area. But unfortunately, because of organized crime, these areas are impacted because livestock is a way to launder the money, to the I'm sorry, money laundering. Because the livestock sector, of course, they don't have any kind of control about the transactions, the banking transactions that take place with the excuse of cattle business. So it's really easy to do this money laundering activities. It's true that the attorney's office, as well as the judges, well, we try to investigate. We don't investigate drug dealing activities, but when we carry our work within the protected areas, we come across this kind of people who, of course, are not pleased to see the work we do in the protected areas because they feel impacted. Unfortunately, the national park area is here's where we see there are 36 cases of illegal activity or land grabbing. There's another one here, another park, both in the south and the west. We have borders with Mexico, so there are many threats and different crimes related to environmental crimes. Because in addition to logging, there is transportation of some types of wood, different species of wood, like cedar and others. Woods that are more demanded, with the highest demand. And of course, the fur of tigers. We have also crocodiles. There's illegal traffic of guacamayas and parrots. So we see that the habitat of the different ecosystems is highly impacted. We see that the destruction is low. So destruction natural resources, unfortunately, also Guatemala is impacted by illegal mining. And we haven't conducted any environmental impact studies, and there's also the exploitation of minerals. Unfortunately, some days ago also, Rainforest was held there. He was doing his job in his national park. Fortunately, he was unharmed, but they did burn the vehicle he was driving. It's a general presentation to tell you about the work that we, these judge, this court carries out, and the complications we've seen regarding the enforcement of the environmental law. If there's any kind of question, we are open to answer in the remaining time. Thank you for your presentation and for the cases you showed in today's session. We continue with a Q&A session, and before we finish today's session, I'd like to make two important announcements. So please do not leave before we finish. The first question is for the case of Brazil and Chile. The question is if there is conciliation, the conciliation or this is required before going to the environmental court. Antonio, if you can start, please. I guess the question was if conciliation was a requirement for going to the environmental court. You're muted. Yes, your mic is muted. Oh, thank you. Conciliation is a possibility only. We have a new civil proceeding code of 2015, and it's a key point there. But usually what happens is that the public ministry in their investigation is not just criminal investigations such as in Guatemala or Chile. We must understand the public ministry are different in each country. In all Latin American countries, most of them at least. In Chile, for example, there is a public ministry that is only criminal. In Brazil, the public ministry works on the environment and from the criminal perspective and the civil perspective, I mean the reparation. And this is why it has powers to start an investigation, and then it calls the party that committed the crime, and I think in 90% of cases, there's an agreement that is called a term to adjust behavior. And it usually includes the recovery of the area, and other criteria. And this behavior adjustment term, then in case it's not complied, is passed on to the legal power or judicial power to enforce it. So we do and we don't have, yes. We have this conciliation, yes, within the public ministry, but it's not in such an organized manner. In the case of Chile, conciliation must take place during the proceedings. I mean, it's not condition of eligibility or admissibility, but it's up to the judge to include it. Chile has always had this conciliation stage within the proceeding, and it's tool that is actually used little, not very used by attorneys, but after the creation of these environmental tribunals, it has gained more and more importance. Now, one of the conditions or key conditions in the collective damage is the indemnity or compensation or to repair damage. This means that the environmental repair action cannot be negotiated different from other conditions. It cannot be an agreement regarding the environmental damage. There has to be, let's say, sentence on it, the defendant cannot be relieved or cannot be waived of this responsibility. However, I mean, or plus, additionally, there is also the function that needs to be played by the judge in this case regarding the agreements that the parties may reach, because to a certain extent, a big extent, the judges are representative of public faith and the general interest. So the rubrics of this conciliation between the parties has to guarantee the community that it is not just agreement between private parties or between public body and whoever has caused the damage. But we guarantee that the environmental damage is being repaired. And that's done during the hearings, at least in our Chilean case. Thank you very much. Here's another question for Antonio. It's about the environmental courts in the states. I mean, in Brazil, in addition to the national court, are there courts at the state level, and how does that work? Or if you can give us an example about state courts. Yes. Here in Brazil, we have courthouses. There are both federal, provincial, and specialized, but not in all states. They're not present in all the states, not in all the regions of our country. It's not a national system, let's say. It's also important to point out that only the province Supreme Court in São Paulo is specialized, only that one. It's interesting because São Paulo it does not specialize in first degree and first instance. The other provinces or states have some first degree specialization, but not second degree. And this creates a system that, again, we cannot talk about a national model. That's what I mean here in Brazil. National degree of specialization in environmental law, as it may be the case in Sweden or in Chile. No, we cannot hear. We have another one. Because of the Guatemala case, if there are any methodologies to rate the penalties. For example, if the sentence depends on the conditions of the defendant, or depends on the amount of damage. For example, spill on a body of water. I mean, you have a methodology to assess the damage. How much should the damage? How do you establish the amount? We need to make a distinction between criminal jurisdiction and civil jurisdiction. In the case of Guatemala, touches since the specialization is criminal, things get mixed. Of course, the criminal jurisdiction, we need to take into account the actions or the economic condition of the defendant. In the civil jurisdiction, what they look at first is the natural recovery, how to repair the ecosystem that has been impacted, that has been harmed, plus compensation for the loss of ecological services. And this is very clear in our jurisdiction. The criminal damage for the criminal side and the civil side. They assess the need for recovery, but it's not linked to the economic condition of the defendant. Maybe there is some linkage, implicit link of the fact, but not, it's not in law. It's not a law.
So in Chile, we have the same logics that they have in Brazil. We also have criminal jurisdiction separate from environmental justice, and that is also that one is already also separate from civil. The same as it was mentioned in Brazil, and law tells us in case of environmental damage, we need to analyze them from civil extracontractual responsibility. We need to analyze these criteria. So one of the principles from civil law that is included in environmental law is comprehensive reparation of the environment. And that's why they need to create the conditions so that it actually happens. Self-distinction. Michael, yeah. Yeah, similarities and distinction between the system in Chile and in Brazil. In Brazil, as in the United States, responsibility for environmental damage is objective, no discussion of guilt. But in case of Chile, it is subjective, right? Based on evidence. Guatemala, the specialized justice in civil matter in relation to environmental matters, we don't have that. Within the penal processes or criminal process, because of those principles of economy, because it is also a burden for the state of Guatemala, we have both criminal responsibility and responsibility in relation to damage caused to nature, and to look for reparation, redress, let's say, for that. Like I explained in my presentation, in environmental matters, it will be almost impossible for an area that has been damaged, that person can come and restore or have it 100% as it was before. If it's a chemical discharge, probably the person who's responsible won't, I don't think it would have the possibility of keeping that body of water as it was before. If water runs, nature repairs by itself, right? But the person or that person who was condemned that can repair 100% damage, it is almost always impossible. Thank you so much for the intervention. I'm sorry, Angela, if I wanted to say something, we need to be a little bit careful with, as Hernandez, like Dr. Hernandez said, with the word, the use of the word impossible. In law, many times impossible is impossible. And what is possible is sometimes fiction of possibility, something that in nature is impossible. So degradation, deforestation is not impossible. It's impossible when the ecosystem is absolutely out. Because one of the characteristics of tropical forests is if deforestation has not been gigantic and it ends, I don't know how you say it in Spanish, seeds banks, natural seed banks, recovery it's not impossible. And we, as judges, need to have this conception. It won't be restoration to status quo, but it will be recovery that will have these conditions to have wildlife again for future generations. And it will take a lot of years. Like a car accident, right? When you have a reparation and all that, no, it's not like that. It will take many years. But we cannot accept as judges that this hypothetical impossibility would be liberality to keep economic activity present in areas where there was illegal deforestation. An observation to what I mean, I don't know if it's clear, it's impossible, is the person who causes damage to repair 100% damage. They can repair economically. Let me give you an example, $50,000. Probably they can pay that amount. Nature is the one who is in charge. My experience is in the Mayan biosphere reservation. It could be 10, 15 years of resilience for the area itself not to be 100% before there was damage. Probably it could be 80% recovery. The impossibility is that for the person does not have the ability of restoring damage within that area, protected area where damage has been caused. That's the impossibility I'm talking about. I understand sometimes human possibility also exists. And we would have to look at concrete situations in each one of the countries. Brazilian Amazon and in Colombia, those cases for poor people are very few in comparison with such big farms and people who don't actually live there. And they also have that perspective and they have this non-written rule. If there is deforestation, I'm gonna pay and bribery and all that, and I can continue with this activity that has caused great damage to future generations. So this conception that we need to have super clear and do not leave the big ones that have gigantic deforestation in tropical forests to hide. How do you say that? Yeah, to hide behind small ones and poor ones. Oh no. So they're not gonna charge from poor ones, they're not gonna charge from our rich either. So this is something, a change of that we have to have that change in our judicial function. Thank you so much for the interesting discussion. We have space for a couple of questions. I think this question is very interesting and it talks about public policy and pedagogy. The question is, have there been actions to design public policy to prevent environmental crimes based on results of actions derived from the cases that are known? Meaning, is there public policy derived from experiences these courts have had? Who is the question for? For any of you, for the three of you. Anybody can start. Unfortunately, we also have negative reactions. Changes of law to impede interpretations that have been prepared by courts. So the law, if the law is going to change, it's not to add protection to the environment, but sometimes it changes for an impossibility of interpretation in favor of the environment. We do have cases, in very many cases, law going against. In the case of Chile, what Minister Benjamin mentions is true as well. It has a virtuous effect, not in public policy, but the way public servants behave. It has a rebound effect, like greater demand. Administrative and standards that are used in the case of conflict resolution, administrative conflict resolution. So what has happened is that sophistication, the sophistication of discussion has increased. Paradoxically, there's another effect. Those less privileged groups, knowledge bar is higher. So finding specialists that can keep a deep discussion is harder. So there is a difference in what procedural law means, inequality of souls. So the administration has an incapacity to face this discussion. A big company can pay for big lawyers that are in charge of these smaller communities, always have a problem to access justice since this justice is more complex. So what Minister Benjamin mentions is true. The fact that these jurisdictions are created brings this level of deepening in law, but it also means that since legislators are not clear about how to regulate this jurisdiction, there's a lot of space open for courts to make decisions about areas that were not considered in the legislative area. So there is jurisprudence, and this courts specialized jurisprudence that means complexity for lawyers who don't have enough knowledge to face not only particular legislation, but decisions that are particular for this type of jurisdiction. In relation to Guatemala, to have public policy based on different experiences, state of Guatemala has mentioned about culture, change of culture. Guatemala, fortunately, we are a developing country, and education is related to having why it is important to take care of the environment. Prevention would always be preferable, because once you get to a judicial file, is because administration could not take care of environment. So having campaigns to raise awareness, this has been a very useful tool in Guatemala. how to create awareness so that people can take care and have that conscience to take care of environment. So that's how it has changed in Guatemala. This is the last question, and I would like to ask 3 experts today to give us 3 pieces of advice so that we can keep them in mind in Colombia with this project that we have in the future. 3 specific pieces of advice so that we can keep in mind when designing this project. Let's start with Minister Benjamin, please. I don't like to give advice, but what we can do is that we can, based on our experience, first of all, the most important one is specialization of public ministry, because it is not specialized. The example is the case in Kenya. They created a specialized court for the environment, and for almost 5 years, they did not have any cases. Nowadays, they do have cases because they already worked on who is going to move trials, who's going to start this. So my emphasis is always first, specialization of public ministry. Because with this specialization, even if there is no specialization in judges, there is something with greater quality. And then ask, that's the perspective. What is the perspective of the country? Is it feasible? Is it necessary to introduce specialized environmental jurisdiction? This is an absolutely necessary exercise. For example, I would like to tell you that in the Brazilian case, how can the environmental jurisdiction be specialized in the state of Amazonas that has a border with Colombia? Here, with very few figures, Vermont has 25,000 square kilometers. Sweden, 445,000 square kilometers. Colombia has 1,100,000 square kilometers, and the state has 1,500,000 square kilometers. So where are we going to set specialized judges? How many are we going to have? How are we going to have evidence? How are we going to collect evidence? Remember, 95% of cities, towns in the state of Amazonas have only one judge. And it's not a judge that's there all the time. So these types of things are the ones that we must work on, and other countries such as Peru are working with, asking, first of all, knowing, is it necessary? Second, is it feasible? And third, what model are we going to use? And then compared law is absolutely necessary so that they get to know positive experiences and difficulties in other countries. India has a specialized environmental justice. They have such big problems. And if we want to have specialized environmental justice, we need to avoid these problems that they are living in other places in the world. So, Michael said it, there is no miracle. And That's the type of event, like events like this discussion, compared law, to get to the best solution. Thank you. Yes, I would add to what Antonio said, to those people who are interested, uh, what's the focus of concern? Acknowledging transdisciplinary character of environmental justice. The way, the shape it takes in Colombia, those justices that will have environmental justices, courts, so on, they should incorporate professionals from other areas somehow. They help understand complexities. When one notices that colleagues they're not close to environmental issues, it is hard for them to find solutions, effective solutions to recompose an ecosystem, or to understand when an ecosystem that collects water has been intervened in a way such that the restoration is needed. So there are certain conditions that are necessary. This is related to courts, but it's also related to the general attorney's office, like Antonio mentioned. So it's not only to have law, it's not only about having lawyers, but other professionals as well. In the case of Colombia, you're going to forgive me. I love Colombia. I have participated so much in events, political, social events, and jurisdictional events as well. I am working with a mining issue in Colombia, and something that has always called my attention is so many regulations, so many laws there in Colombia. So that's one of the practical problems the country faces. And this is called red tape, bureaucracy, judicial bureaucracy, and regulation bureaucracy. So I also think that reform and clarifying rules applicable in Colombia. It is difficult to find legislation. It is difficult to understand it sometimes. It is difficult to go after responsibilities because applicable legislation is not known. I have not seen this anywhere else than in Colombia. You need to ask the authority what applicable regulation should be for that case. Everybody should know it. I mean, access to justice, legislation is more efficient compared to other countries. Thank you, Judge Hernandez. In relation to my position about this question, incorporating specialized judges is necessary. The environment is the one that protects our health, our life. We need to have quality of life. Many times, in relation to environmental issues, people just don't pay attention to this. About judges, they must be specialized. Unfortunately, one, as a lawyer, we know about applicability processes to guarantee due process, effective means. But behind judges, there must be a technical team, environmental engineers, for example, other specialties, because we know about the law, about law, but about science, techniques, everything in environment, since this is complex, it is necessary to have a technical team behind the judge so that reparation is as close as it was before damage occurred. Thank you all the speakers. A very interesting discussion. Two announcements that I promised. I just shared through the chat in Zoom and YouTube the website Eli. It has different types of activities and the framework in with the general attorney's office. There's also a website where you're gonna find and you're gonna have presentations, some memoirs, through presentations. I just shared the link. It is a project that is in construction, is being built. And next session is July 9th, 9 to 12, compare law, and we'll have magistrate Oscar Darío Amaya and a special jurisdiction for peace and amparo. And they were going to tell us the perspective as judges and representatives of the academia. They're going to tell us about their positions, about the potential these instruments have to create jurisdiction that in the country. Thank you very much. We'll see you in 1 week next Thursday. Goodbye. Thank you. Goodbye.